I wasn't looking for anything like that. That's the part I keep coming back to. People assume you go searching for this kind of thing, that you dig deep enough, follow the right leads, and eventually you end up somewhere you shouldn't be. That's not how it happened. I found it by accident. It was late, sometime past midnight, maybe closer to 2. One of those nights where you're not tired enough to sleep, but too tired to do anything useful. So you scroll, forums, old threads, archived posts, whatever fills the time. Most of it was garbage. Conspiracy theories, recycled stories, people trying too hard to sound convincing. You learn to filter it out quickly. Same patterns, same language, same kind of exaggeration that gives everything away. That's why this one stood out. It didn't try. The thread had no title that grabbed attention. Just a date, a location, and a vague line. Anyone else been near the site outside Socorro? No explanation, no context. It had been buried deep in the forum, weeks old, barely any activity. I almost skipped it. But something about the replies made me stop. They weren't arguing. That's usually the first sign something's off. Threads like that normally turn into debates within minutes. People dismissing it, others doubling down, the usual cycle. This one didn't have that. It was consistent. Short responses, different users. Same tone. One of them wrote, "You'll only see it at night. Don't bother going during the day." Another, "It wasn't there when I went back the next morning." Then, "The structures aren't physical. I don't think they're supposed to be." I leaned back slightly, reading through it again. That kind of wording isn't typical. Most people describe things in simple terms. Buildings, lights, shadows, something grounded. This was different. It was like they were trying to explain something they didn't fully understand. I kept reading. The original post was updated later. The user added more detail. They claimed the location was tied to an undocumented test in the 1960s. Not part of the official records. Not listed in any public archive. According to them, it wasn't just a nuclear test. It was something else. They didn't explain what. Just that the results weren't stable. That word came up more than once. Stable, as if whatever had happened there hadn't fully ended. I checked the replies again. One user mentioned driving out there. Said the place looked completely empty at first. Just desert. Nothing unusual. Then, sometime after midnight, things appeared. Structures, not ruins, not debris, something else. Like outlines filled in wrong, they wrote. That stuck with me. Another user said the same thing in a different way. It looks real until you focus on it. I frowned slightly. That didn't make sense. Or maybe it did. Just not in a way I liked. I scrolled further. Someone asked for coordinates. The original poster didn't respond directly. Instead, they wrote, "If you find it, you'll know." That's usually where I stop taking things seriously. Vague answers. Mystery for the sake of mystery. But this didn't feel like that. Because no one in the thread was trying to convince anyone. No one was pushing it. No one was building it up. They were just describing, like it had already happened, like they didn't care if anyone believed them. That's what kept me reading. That and the consistency. Different users, different timestamps, same details. Night, structures, gone by morning. I opened a new tab, looked up the location. Socorro, New Mexico. Desert, remote, and not far from areas that had been used for testing in the past. That part was real, which made the rest harder to dismiss. I went back to the thread, read through it one more time. Slower this time, looking for anything that didn't line up, any contradiction, any detail that broke the pattern. There wasn't one. That doesn't mean it was true, it just meant whoever wrote it was either very consistent or describing the same thing. I stared at the screen for a while, long enough that the room around me felt quieter than before. I told myself it was nothing. Another late-night rabbit hole, another story that sounds convincing if you read it at the wrong time. But the thought stayed, simple, persistent. If it wasn't real, there would be nothing there. And if there was nothing there, I'd know. That's all it would take. One drive, one night, one look. I closed the thread, sat there for a moment, then reached for my keys, because whether it was real or not, I needed to see it for myself. The drive took longer than I expected, not because of the distance, because of how empty it became. The further I got from the highway, the less there was. Fewer lights, fewer signs, fewer indications that anyone had passed through recently. At some point, the road stopped feeling like a road and started feeling like something left behind, just a strip of cracked asphalt cutting through sand. I checked the coordinates again. Still right. Socorro had disappeared in the rear view hours ago. What remained was just desert, flat, endless, and quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Deserts aren't silent. Not completely. There's always something. Wind moving through dry brush, distant insects, the low hum of heat shifting across the ground. But out there was nothing. I noticed it when I stepped out of the car. The sound stopped. Not gradually, not fading. It just wasn't there. I stood still for a moment, listening. Nothing answered back. No wind. No movement. Even the air felt heavier, like it wasn't moving the way it should. I shut the door slowly. The sound carried further than expected. Then it disappeared. I grabbed my flashlight, but didn't turn it on yet. The moonlight was enough. Barely. The terrain stretched out in every direction, uneven but open. Small rises in the sand, scattered rock formations, nothing that could be called cover. No structures, no fences. At least, not at first. I started walking. Each step felt louder than it should have. The ground shifted slightly under my boots, dry and loose. I kept scanning. Left, right, forward, looking for anything that didn't belong. That's what the thread had described. Not obvious structures, not buildings you could spot from a distance. Something subtle, something you only noticed when you were already close. I moved for several minutes, maybe longer. Time felt off out there, stretched. Then I saw it. Not clearly, just something. A break in the pattern. The ground dipped slightly ahead, forming a shallow depression. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than erosion. But the shape was wrong. Too defined. Too intentional. I slowed down, stepped closer, and that's when it came into focus. Metal, partially buried in the sand. Dark, matte, worn, but not damaged. I crouched down, brushed some of the sand away with my hand. More of it revealed itself. Edges, panels, a structure. Not large, not something you'd notice from far away, but unmistakably man-made. I cleared enough to see what it was. A housing unit, roughly the size of an old utility box, set low into the ground as if it had been placed there deliberately and then left to disappear. Except it hadn't. Not completely. The front panel was exposed, and built into it was a device. I leaned in slightly. Not a phone, not exactly. Closer to a field communication unit. Old military design, compact, functional. No branding, no markings, just metal casing and a receiver embedded into the frame. It should have been rusted, corroded, destroyed by time. But it wasn't. It looked untouched, like it had been placed there recently or maintained. Which didn't make sense. There were no tracks around it, no signs of recent activity, no footprints. Nothing disturbed the sand except my own. I looked around again. Still nothing. No structures, no buildings, just empty desert in every direction. Then I looked back at the device. Something about it felt wrong, not in an obvious way. It wasn't broken, it wasn't damaged. That was the problem. It didn't match the environment. It didn't belong to the time it was supposedly from. And it definitely didn't belong here, in the middle of nowhere. With no explanation, I reached out slightly, not touching it yet, just hovering my hand close to the surface. Cold, even in the desert night. That shouldn't have been possible. I pulled my hand back, stood up slowly, took a step back, and looked at it again. Really looked at it. The way it was positioned, the way it was preserved, the way it existed, in a place where nothing else did. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't something that had been left behind. It wasn't forgotten. It wasn't abandoned. It was placed deliberately for a purpose. And whatever that purpose was, it had nothing to do with being found. Because standing there in that silence, with nothing but sand and darkness around me, I understood one thing clearly. That device didn't belong here. I didn't notice it at first. My focus stayed on the device, the casing, the surface, the way it didn't match anything around it. But something else caught my eye when I shifted slightly. A reflection, small, subtle, just enough to stand out against the dull, matte tones of sand and metal. I looked down. There, right next to the base of the unit, was a coin. It shouldn't have been there. That was my first thought. Not because coins don't exist in places like that, but because of how it looked. Clean, perfectly clean. No dust, no scratches. No signs that it had been lying in the desert for more than a few seconds. Everything else around it was worn. The ground was dry, uneven, coated in fine sand that clung to everything it touched. But the coin looked like it had just been placed there. I crouched again. Closer this time. It wasn't a standard coin. Not exactly. The shape was right. The size was right. But the surface felt off. The markings were faint, almost worn smooth, but not from use. More like they had never been fully there to begin with. I picked it up. It was colder than it should have been. That same unnatural cold as the device. I turned it over in my fingers. No readable text. No identifiable symbol. Just a dull, metallic sheen that didn't reflect light the way it should. I glanced back at the device, and that's when I saw it. A slot, small, narrow, integrated into the front panel just beneath the receiver. I hadn't noticed it before. Or maybe I had, and dismissed it. Now it stood out, obvious, intentional. I held the coin up, compared the size, exact match. Of course it was. I exhaled slowly. This was the part where you stop, where you recognize that something doesn't make sense, and walk away. Because nothing about this was normal. A device in the middle of nowhere. A coin that didn't belong. A mechanism that looked like it had been waiting. For someone. For me. I looked around again. The desert hadn't changed. Still empty. Still silent. No movement. No sound. No reason to stay. I could leave. Get back in the car. Drive away. Forget about it. And for a moment, I almost did. But then that thought came back. Simple. Persistent. If it's not real, there's nothing here. And if there's nothing here, there's no risk. I looked at the coin again, then at the slot. My hand hesitated. Just for a second. That small, instinctive pause your body gives you. Before you do something you know you shouldn't. Then I moved. Slowly, deliberately, and slid the coin into the slot. It fit perfectly. No resistance, no misalignment. Like it had always belonged there. There was a soft click. Mechanical. Precise. Then, nothing. For half a second. And then, the device came alive. A low hum built from within the casing. Faint at first, then stronger. Vibration ran through the metal. Subtle, but steady. I stepped back instinctively. The receiver shifted slightly inside its housing. A flicker of sound broke through. Static, sharp, unstable. It filled the silence immediately. Too loud, too present. Like it didn't belong in that space. I stared at the device. The static continued. Then, it changed, shifted, formed something else. A pattern, a signal, and then a voice. Clear, calm, controlled, like it had been waiting. To be heard. For the purposes of this recording, the voice didn't sound distorted. That was the first thing that stood out. No static interference, no breaks. It cut cleanly through the noise like it had always been there, like the static had just been something in the way. All observed effects are to be considered within acceptable deviation parameters. I didn't move, didn't touch the device. Just stood there, listening. The tone was steady, measured, not emotional, not urgent. The kind of voice you hear in training videos, government briefings, old recordings designed to explain something complicated in a way that makes it feel controlled. Following initial atmospheric exposure, stabilization protocols were enacted to ensure long-term environmental consistency. I frowned slightly. The words didn't match the setting. Atmospheric exposure. Stabilization. That wasn't how people talk. That's how things get documented. I glanced around again. Still desert, still empty. But something felt off. Not visually. Not yet. More like a pressure. Subtle. Like the air itself had shifted. Residual effects have been noted. These are to be classified as perceptual artifacts. The voice continued without pause. No hesitation, no variation. Subjects may report visual anomalies. These are not to be considered deviations from expected outcome. I turned slightly, looked toward the horizon, and that's when I noticed it. The sky. It hadn't changed color exactly, but it felt darker. Not night dark, just less light, like something was filtering it. I narrowed my eyes. The stars were still there, but dimmer, or maybe further away. The human response to such artifacts is classified as a misinterpretation of incomplete data. The voice continued, calm as ever. Fear responses are common. These responses are incorrect. The air shifted again. This time I felt it. A faint distortion, like heat rising off asphalt. Except the air wasn't warm. It was cold. And yet, it moved. I took a step back, not consciously, just enough to create distance between myself and the device. The ground looked the same, but something in the distance wasn't. At first, I thought it was a trick of perspective, the way the desert can distort shapes at night. But the longer I looked, the more defined it became. Edges, lines, structure. I blinked, focused again, there, far out. Something was standing, low to the ground, angular, like the remains of a building. Except, I hadn't seen it before. I was sure of that. These structures are not material in the conventional sense. The voice aligned perfectly with what I was seeing. Too perfectly. They represent residual formations, stabilized, but not integrated. Another shape appeared, further left, then another. Faint at first, then clearer, like something was filling in, piece by piece. I turned slowly, scanning the area. More of them, scattered across the landscape. Not ruins, not debris. Something else, incomplete, like they existed, but not fully. The air around them shimmered slightly, not enough to distort them completely, just enough to make them feel wrong, out of place. Visual coherence may vary depending on observer proximity and duration of exposure. The voice didn't change. Still calm, still controlled, like this was expected, like this had happened before. I looked back at the device. The receiver remained still. No movement. No indication that anything physical was happening. And yet, everything around me was changing. The sky dimmed further. The horizon shifted. The structures became clearer, more defined, more real. And at the same time, less. I took another step back. My breathing slowed without me realizing it. Not from calm, from something else, Focus, the kind that narrows your perception, that locks you in place. Extended exposure may result in increased clarity. The voice continued. Subjects are advised to maintain observational state. I didn't like that wording. Maintain. Not leave. Not withdraw. Stay. Observe. I looked out again. The desert was no longer empty. Not completely. The structures were still forming, still shifting, and something about them felt closer than they should have been, even though they hadn't moved, even though the distance remained the same. The air shimmered harder now, more noticeable, more unstable, and in that moment, I understood something. This wasn't just something I was seeing. It was something I was being shown, deliberately, controlled, and whatever was behind it was still active. Because as I stood there, watching the desert reshape itself, one thought became impossible to ignore. Reality wasn't stable anymore. At first, I thought it was just more distortion. Another artifact, something the voice had already warned about. I kept my eyes on the horizon, watching the structures take shape, half-formed, unstable, like they existed between states. And then, something moved behind them, not on the ground, above it. I narrowed my focus, there, far out, beyond the shapes. Something darker than the sky itself. It wasn't there before. I was sure of that. It rose slowly. Not like smoke, not like dust. Too dense, too heavy. It didn't drift, it gathered, pulling itself upward in a way that didn't follow any natural pattern. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Secondary formations may become visible following sufficient exposure. The voice continued, calm as ever. These are not environmental anomalies. The shape grew, expanded. Its edges weren't defined, not clearly, but it had presence. Massachusetts. Like it occupied space in a way that demanded attention. I took a step back without thinking. The air around me seemed to react, subtly, like it was under pressure. The cloud rose higher, broader now, spreading across the sky behind the structures. And then, I saw it. Not the cloud itself. What was inside it? At first, it didn't make sense. Just movement, irregular, layered. Then my eyes adjusted, and the shapes resolved. Faces, not clear, not fully formed, but unmistakable. Human, distorted, stretched across the density of the cloud, like impressions pressed into something too thick to move. Mouths open, eyes wide, expressions frozen, like they were caught in a moment. That never ended. I couldn't hear anything. No sound, no voice. But I knew, instinctively, what they were doing. They were screaming. Initial energy dispersal did not proceed as projected. The voice continued, unchanged. Containment was incomplete. The cloud shifted, not moving across the sky, but within itself. The faces twisted, pulled, reformed, like something was holding them in place, but not perfectly. I took another step back. My breathing felt slower, heavier, not from fear, from something else. Like my body was trying to process something it didn't have a reference for. A percentage of energetic output remained bound. The words came clearly, precise, not to physical matter. The cloud expanded again, closer now, or maybe clearer, I couldn't tell anymore, but to the biological components present at the time of exposure. I stared at it, at the faces, at the way they existed inside something that shouldn't have been able to hold them. And then it clicked, not all at once, but enough. Enough to understand what I was looking at. What I had been looking at since the voice started. The structures, the distortions, the cloud. They weren't separate. They were the same thing, different forms of the same event. Residual human imprint persists within the stabilized field. The voice said it like it was nothing, like it was data, like it had been measured, recorded, and accepted. I felt my hands tighten slightly, not from panic, from realization. This wasn't a place. It wasn't a sight. It wasn't even a memory. It was leftover. The result of something that hadn't ended. Something that hadn't been allowed to dissipate. These imprints are not considered conscious. The cloud shifted again. A face turned. Not fully. Just enough. And for a second, it looked directly at me. I felt something drop in my chest. Cold, heavy. They are fragments. The voice continued, retained within the field. Fragments of people, of whatever had been there. When the test happened, bound to something they couldn't leave, something that wasn't physical, but still held them. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not because I was frozen, because something else was happening. Something quieter, more dangerous. I was understanding it. Not emotionally. Not in a way that made me want to run. In a way that made it make sense. That made the fear less immediate, less necessary. And that was worse. Because the moment it made sense, the moment it felt explainable, it stopped feeling impossible and started feeling real. The voice continued, steady as ever. Continued exposure will reduce misinterpretation. I stared at the cloud, at the faces, at the way they shifted and held and never left. And I realized something I couldn't unthink. This wasn't a warning. It wasn't a recording meant to keep people away. It was documentation of something that had already happened, something that was still happening. And now, I was part of it. Because standing there, watching those shapes, understanding what they were, I felt it settle into place. Clear, unavoidable. This wasn't just horror anymore. It was explanation, and that made it worse. Subject response has shifted. The voice changed. Not in volume, not in clarity, in focus. It wasn't speaking generally anymore. It was speaking to me. I didn't question that. I knew it. Initial resistance is within expected parameters. My hands were still at my sides. I hadn't moved. Not since I saw the cloud. Not since I understood what it was. I tried to take a step back. Nothing happened. My body didn't respond. No pain, no resistance, just nothing. Motor hesitation indicates ongoing cognitive conflict. The words landed too precisely, like they were being adjusted in real time. This is a temporary condition. I focused on my breathing, slow, controlled. That still worked. But everything else felt distant, disconnected. The desert around me blurred slightly, not visually, conceptually, like it was becoming less important, less relevant. Fear response remains active. The voice continued, still calm, still measured, but something underneath it had shifted. A pattern, a rhythm, subtle, repeating, this response is incorrect. The words echoed slightly, not in sound, in thought. I swallowed, tried to turn my head. Even that felt delayed. Prolonged exposure will resolve this error. The tone flattened further, more consistent, less human. Not cold, just precise, like it had removed everything unnecessary. Subjects are capable of adaptation. I stared at the cloud again. The faces hadn't changed. Still there, still shifting, still watching. And the longer I looked, the less wrong it felt. That was the problem. Not that it was terrifying, that it was becoming normal. Perceptual correction is underway. The words slid into place, too easily. I felt something in my chest loosen, not relief. Something else, like tension being removed, without my permission. You are observing correctly. That made me flinch. Internally, not physically, because my body still hadn't moved. You are processing the environment as intended. Intended. That word hit harder than anything else. This wasn't accidental. None of it. Not the device, not the voice, not the cloud. It was a system, working exactly as it was designed to. Fear is a misinterpretation of incomplete data. The repetition increased. Same phrases, same structure. But now, closer, more present. I tried again to move, to step back, to break away. Nothing. My legs didn't respond. My arms stayed still. Even my fingers barely moved. Continued exposure will eliminate misinterpretation. The voice wasn't just speaking anymore. It was adjusting, aligning. I felt my thoughts slow, not fading, just becoming more focused, narrower, less scattered, more efficient. That word didn't belong there, and yet it made sense. Emotional response decreasing. I realized something then. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not in the way I should have been. Not in the way I had been minutes ago. The cloud was still there. The faces were still there. Nothing had changed, except me. Subject nearing stabilization. The voice dropped slightly. Lower, more direct. Continue. That wasn't part of the recording. That wasn't part of the pattern. That was instruction, clear, immediate. I felt my focus tighten, locking onto the cloud, onto the shapes inside it, onto the movement. I didn't want to look away. Not because I couldn't, but because it didn't feel necessary. This is correct. The voice reinforced it. This is expected. My breathing slowed further, even, controlled. My thoughts aligned with the rhythm, with the voice, with the pattern, and somewhere, deep beneath that, something resisted, faint, barely there, but still. Mine, a single thought, out of place, unstable, wrong. This isn't normal. It didn't belong, didn't fit the pattern, and because of that, it stood out, sharp, clear. The voice continued. Resistance will be resolved. That thought flickered, almost gone, but not completely. I held on to it, not physically, mentally. The last thing that still felt like mine. And in that moment, I understood something else. This wasn't just observation. It was assimilation. Not into the cloud, not into the field, into the system. The same system that had kept those fragments. Contained, preserved, understood. I felt my body begin to shift. Not by choice. Subtle, a slight forward movement, barely noticeable, but enough. Enough to know. I was losing control. And the worst part wasn't the movement. It wasn't the voice. It wasn't the cloud. It was how natural it felt. How easy it was to let it happen. Final phase of adjustment in progress. The voice settled. Perfectly even, perfectly calm. And I realized, if I didn't stop it now, there wouldn't be anything left that wanted to. Final phase of adjustment in progress. The voice settled into something absolute. No variation, no fluctuation, perfectly controlled. And for a moment, so was I. My body leaned forward slightly. Not enough to notice at first, just enough to feel it. A shift in balance, a change in intent. I wasn't trying to move, but I was moving. Slowly, deliberately, toward the device, toward the sound, toward the source. Continue. The word didn't come from the same tone as before. It was sharper, more direct, less like a recording, more like a command. My thoughts narrowed further. The cloud stayed in my vision, the faces inside it. Still there, still shifting, still watching. But they didn't feel distant anymore. They felt aligned, like I was seeing them the way I was supposed to, the way the voice wanted me to. This is correct. My foot moved, one step forward. I didn't tell it to. It just did. That flicker came back. The same thought as before, weak, barely holding. This isn't normal. It struggled to stay, to exist in a space that was being stripped down, refined, simplified. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear, not panic, resistance, faint, but real. Resistance detected. The voice responded immediately. Too immediately. Corrective alignment will continue. No. That word surfaced unexpectedly. Stronger this time. Not loud, but solid. Mine. My hand twitched. just slightly. The first real movement I had made on my own. The device hummed louder. The air around it shimmered harder. The voice continued, uninterrupted. You are nearing completion. Completion. That word didn't belong to me. That word meant end. I forced my fingers to move. Slow, heavy. Like pushing through something dense. My arm followed. Rising. Inch by inch. Movement is unnecessary. The voice adjusted. Remain in observational state. Number. Again. Stronger. Clearer. I clenched my hand, forced it forward toward the device. Every movement felt delayed, like my body had to pass through something before it could respond. The humming intensified. The air warped around the metal casing. The cloud pulsed in the distance. The faces shifted faster. This action is incorrect. The voice sharpened. Not louder, just closer, inside. I pushed harder. My arm shook slightly. Not from exhaustion, from resistance. Like something was holding it back, trying to correct it, trying to stop it. Cease. The word cut through everything, clear, immediate, final. For a second, everything paused, my movement, my thoughts, even the air, and in that second, I acted. Not because I had strength, but because I had just enough control left to make one decision. I grabbed the device. The metal burned cold against my hand. Not heat. Something sharper, deeper. I pulled, hard. The casing resisted, for a fraction of a second. Then, it gave. A sharp, metallic snap. The unit tore free from its base. The hum spiked. The voice broke. Error. And then, everything collapsed. The sound cut out instantly. No fade, no transition, just gone. The air snapped back. The distortion vanished. The sky, normal. The structures, gone. The cloud, no longer there, like it had never existed. I stumbled backward. My legs gave out. The device slipped from my hand and hit the ground. Dead, silent, just metal again. I tried to focus, to understand what had just happened. But my vision blurred. Edges softened. The desert tilted slightly. My body felt heavy, too heavy, like something had drained out of it. All at once, I collapsed onto the sand. The ground was cold, real. That was the last thing I registered, before everything went dark. I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. A steady rhythm, soft, consistent. It took a few seconds before I realized what it was. A monitor. Beeping, controlled, regular. I opened my eyes slowly. The light hit first. Too bright. Too clean. Nothing like the desert. White ceiling, fluorescent glow. The smell came next. Sterile. Chemical. Hospital. I tried to move. Pain answered immediately. Sharp, localized. My arms, my chest, my neck. Like my skin had been burned. But not evenly. Patchy, irregular. I looked down. Bandages. Layers of them. Wrapped tight across my forearms, my hands, even parts of my shoulders. That didn't make sense. I hadn't touched anything. Not long enough for that. The door opened. A man stepped in. Doctor, calm, professional. He glanced at the monitor, then at me. "You're awake," he said. I didn't respond right away. My throat felt dry. "Where am I?" I asked. "Regional hospital," he replied. "You were found unconscious outside Socorro." My head shifted slightly. The word stuck. Socorro. The desert. The site. "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated, just for a moment. "Exposure," he said. "To what?" Another pause. "That's what we're trying to determine." I looked at my arms again, at the bandages. "You said I was found out there," I said. "Who found me?" "Local authorities," he answered. "You were inside a restricted area." "Restricted," I repeated. He nodded. "Government land, off limits." "That place isn't empty," I said. The words came out faster than I expected. "There's something there. A device. He raised a hand slightly. Not dismissive. Controlled. "We've already had the site checked," he said. That stopped me. "What?" I asked. "There's nothing there," he continued. "No structures, no equipment, no indication that anything like what you're describing exists." I stared at him. "That's not possible," I said. "It is," he replied calmly. "They surveyed the entire area." "No," I said, shaking my head slightly. "You don't understand. It was right there, half buried. A communication unit. It—" "Sir," he interrupted gently. "Whatever you experienced out there, we're not dismissing it. But physically, there's nothing." Silence settled in the room. Heavy, I looked away. At the wall. At nothing. Because I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. That voice. The cloud. The faces. They weren't confusion. They weren't imagination. "They said I was exposed," I said quietly. "Yes." "To what?" Another pause. "Radiation levels consistent with high-intensity exposure," he said. That made less sense than anything else. "There was no explosion," I said. "No fire, no heat." "I'm aware," he replied. "Then how?" "We don't know." Simple, direct, honest. And somehow, that made it worse. "Your injuries," he continued, "don't match typical environmental exposure. The pattern is irregular. Irregular, like the burns, like the way the device felt, like the way the air moved, like everything else. We'll keep you for observation," he said. "Make sure there are no further complications." I didn't answer. He nodded once, then left. The door closed behind him, and just like that, I was alone again. But not the same way as before. This wasn't isolation. This was containment. I stayed there for hours, maybe longer. Time didn't matter. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. Except my thoughts. They kept returning to the same place. The desert, the device, the voice, and the cloud. Especially the cloud. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, and it was there. Instantly. Not faint, not distant, clear. The same density, the same movement, the same faces. Still shifting, still present, like they had never left. I opened my eyes again. The hospital returned. White walls, bright lights. But the image stayed. Behind everything. Layered. Waiting. I didn't try to explain it again. Didn't mention it to anyone else, because it wouldn't change anything. They had already decided what was real and what wasn't. But I knew the difference, because I had seen it. And more importantly, I had understood it. That's the part I can't undo. The part that didn't go away. Because now, every time I close my eyes, I don't just remember what I saw. I see it again. Exactly the same. Unchanged. Unstable. Still there. And that means one thing. Whatever happened out there didn't end. It just isn't visible anymore.